We all love watching our favorite players make big plays and score touchdowns or force the opposing team to punt the ball after a big sack, but not every player plays forever. And at the end of the day, the NFL is a business. Every year, teams release or trade players for what they believe is in the franchise's best interest. The Titans didn't want to give A.J. Brown a long-term contract and dealt him on draft night to the Eagles, and it's been a tale of two franchises since. Marquise Brown also privately requested a trade, and he is now a member of the Arizona Cardinals. But sometimes players get released because teams can't find a trading partner. A lot of the time, it's due to a bad contract and that nobody wants to take on a $20+ million player, either coming off of an injury or a player that's had a couple of bad years. And in today's video, we are going to discuss 4 NFL players that could get cut this offseason. It's not limited to just these players, and there is a lot to dive into in today's video, and without further ado, let's begin. And the first player we are going to discuss in today's video is Bengals running back Joe Mixon. Joe was a second-round pick back in 2017 and has 3 1,000-yard rushing seasons to his name. Lost within the Bengals' 2021 team success, as they were on their way to a Super Bowl appearance with the emergence of Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, was how good of a year Joe Mixon had. Mixon had over 1,500 total yards and 16 total touchdowns and made his only career Pro Bowl. He had career highs in rushing attempts, yards, and touchdowns, and even had a then career high in receiving yards and touchdowns too. He would go on to have an even better year as a receiving back in 2022. And having said that, you may be wondering, well, why would the Bengals cut Mixon? And it boils down to one thing: money. If Mixon plays for the Bengals in 2023, he will have a cap hit of $12.7 million. If they cut him, he will have a dead cap of just $5.5 million, and the team would save over $7 million by releasing him. And he had a down year in 2022, as he rushed for less than 4 yards per carry, and aside from a singular monstrous game against the Panthers, he was not a good running back. And if you take away Mixon's game against the Panthers, he would have had a 188 carry, 661 yard, 3 rushing touchdown season. 661 rushing yards on 188 carries averages out to 3.5 yards per carry, and when you're getting paid north of $10 million at a position where it's already scrutinized to pay running backs, you have to produce, and Mixon, outside of one game, simply did not. It's much easier to take a swing on a running back in the 3rd or 4th round and pay them on the rookie scale than it is to pay a 27-year-old Joe Mixon coming off of a down year with over 1,300 career NFL carries and an additional 231 receptions of wear and tear on his body. And what's going to stink for Joe Mixon and for a couple of other running backs that could get cut this offseason, like Ezekiel Elliott of the Cowboys and Dalvin Cook of the Vikings, is this is a good running back draft class. It's not just Bijan Robinson. There's plenty of backs like Jahmyr Gibbs, Devon Achane, and my personal favorite of the bunch in Zach Charbonnet. It's much easier to replace a running back this year than most, which leads me to believe Mixon is gone. He had a good game in the win over Buffalo in the playoffs as he ran for over 100 yards and a touchdown, but how did he follow that up in the AFC Championship game against Kansas City? He had 8 carries for 19 yards, which comes out to just 2.4 yards per carry. Because of how violent the NFL is and how tolling it is on the body, paying a running back almost never works out because of injury or a player just wearing down physically over the course of their career. Mixon is no different, and if you take away what was a clear outlier game in the Panthers game, he ran for just 3 touchdowns in 13 games, and the Bengals can find someone who is $10 million per year cheaper to do the exact same thing, and I think Joe Mixon will be cut in a few short weeks. Next up may be a surprising one, but it is Keenan Allen of the Los Angeles Chargers. There's an old saying that the best ability is availability, and it unfortunately applies to Keenan. He missed some time in 2022 due to a hamstring injury and played in just 10 of 17 games. And in the past 3 years, he's played in 16 games just once. Granted, in 2020, he played in 14 out of 16 games, as it was a 16-game schedule compared to the 17-game schedule now, but Keenan entering the 2023 season at 31 years old certainly does not help his case. However, what does help Keenan's case is how productive he was down the stretch of the 2022 season. In a year where the Chiefs went on to win a Super Bowl, and in a year where the Raiders were losing game after game and Derek Carr was benched, and the Broncos were, well, the Broncos, the Chargers were forgotten about in a lot of ways. It was a lot of, sure, they have Justin Herbert, but we don't really have to worry about them because they're going to lose in the playoffs because, and the reasons would be they're the Chargers or because of Brandon Staley. But lost within the Chargers season, and especially during the final 8 games, was how well Keenan played coming off of a hamstring injury. He had over 670 yards in those 8 games, which would have put him on pace for over 1,400 yards had he played all 17 games and was cooking. The magical question of why would they cut him if he played so well down the stretch is a great question, and it boils down to money. The Chargers are $20 million over the cap at the moment, and Keenan will have a cap hit of $21.7 million in 2023, compared to having a dead cap of just $6.9 million. Translation, they save $14.8 million by cutting Keenan. I do think out of any of the players in today's video, he has the best chance to be on his current team's roster at the start of the 2023 season because of how much value he brings to his team when healthy. And to further back this up, per Spotrac.com, which is a very good tool to use for players' contract and teams' cap situations, they can restructure Keenan to a more team-friendly deal. I would love for the Chargers to have a trio of Keenan, Mike Williams, and a first-round receiver next year, and I hope it all works out. But do not be surprised if the Chargers opt to make a business decision, and a business decision that would save them nearly $15 million if they cut the longtime veteran. We are staying in the AFC West for the next player, and if you had to guess who the Chiefs' second highest paid player in 2023 would be, you'd probably guess defensive tackle Chris Jones, who just had a 15.5 sack season, or tight end Travis Kelce. And you'd be wrong, as it's defensive end Frank Clark. Frank is a player that's played in 29 games over the past 2 seasons and has just 9.5 sacks in those 29 games. And while sacks are not the deciding stat in whether or not a player should stay or should be cut, he had just 22 tackles during the 2021 season, and granted he improved that to 39 in 2022, his cap hit is not justifiable in terms of what he brings to the table. Clark has back-to-back seasons of over 50 pressures, and I don't want this to come across like Frank is a typical older player that just doesn't have it anymore, because that's not true, and he can be a solid player for a lot of teams in the right role, but he's nowhere close to the player he was when Kansas City traded for him during the 2019 offseason. They traded for a player who, for the Seahawks, had 32 sacks in his previous 3 years, and were expecting to pair that type of production up with defensive tackle Chris Jones and reap the rewards. Heading into 2019, they had Chris Jones, who was coming off of a 15.5 sack year at defensive tackle, by the way, along with the newly acquired Clark, who was coming off of a 13 sack year, and while this team went on to win the Super Bowl, and eventually a couple of years later too, it wasn't because of this duo teaming up and combining for 30 sacks and wreaking havoc game after game after game. And lost within the past couple years of the Chiefs' success is how underwhelming Clark has been since being a Chief. Sure, he's had his moments, and he hasn't been a bust for them by any means or stretch of the imagination. It's just the Chiefs wanted more than 23.5 sacks in 4 years. And I don't blame General Manager Brett Veach for making this trade either. This trade was made after they lost to the Patriots in the AFC Championship game, and they responded with a Super Bowl win the ensuing year. Veach thought he was making a pretty safe bet, as he sent a first-round pick to Seattle for a player who had 2 double-digit sack seasons in his first 4 years. This trade, I would say, worked out for the Chiefs, just maybe not to the level they wanted, and certainly not to the point where they are willing to pay Frank Clark $30 million in 2023 when he has a dead cap of $9 million, meaning they can and will save $21 million by releasing him. I mocked the Chiefs' LSU pass rusher B.J. Ojulari in a video that was released Saturday in anticipation of this, and I would be extremely surprised if Clark is not cut this offseason. Next up is two players from the same team, and the first one we will discuss is Ryan Tannehill of the Titans. Tannehill signed a 4-year, $118 million contract extension back in March of 2020, and when he signed this extension, or more so the timing of when this was happening, the Titans really didn't have a choice. And here's what I mean by that. When Ryan Tannehill took over for Marcus Mariota in 2019, they were a 2-4 team, and as crazy as this is going to sound, it was the Texans' division for the next few years. They had a young quarterback in Deshaun Watson, and Andrew Luck retired a few months earlier. However, Ryan Tannehill had something to say to that, and during the final 10 games, he was 7-3 as a starter, threw for nearly 260 yards per game, and had a very good touchdown-to-interception ratio of 22-5. And because of a legitimate passing attack, Derrick Henry was freed in a lot of ways too, and he missed a game down the stretch, so in 9 games, Derrick ran for over 1,100 yards and 12 touchdowns to close the 2019 season. The Titans went on to win 2 playoff games, which were pretty significant playoff games, in Tom Brady's final game as a Patriot, and then the win in Baltimore over the MVP Lamar Jackson and the Ravens. The Titans were handcuffed, as even if it was a fluke year, they could not afford to let Tannehill walk. And credit to Tannehill for playing great during the 2020 season, as he threw for over 3,800 yards and had a career-high 33 touchdown passes. But fast forward to now, and the Titans' future is bleak. Ryan has a cap hit of $36.6 million and is coming off of a year in which he played just 12 games and is guaranteed $18 million next year. Tennessee will save 18 by cutting him, and at the moment they are $28 million over the cap limit. By cutting Tannehill and left tackle Taylor Lewan, they would then have $4.5 million to spend in free agency and draft picks. There will of course be more cuts and restructures and everything along these lines, but cutting Tannehill and Lewan make a lot of sense. Taylor Lewan is going to turn 32 years old this offseason and has torn his ACL in 2 of the last 3 seasons. He has a cap hit of $14.8 million and has 0 guaranteed dollars left on his deal. Lewan also hosts a podcast which some of you may be familiar with called Bussin' with the Boys, and I've seen multiple clips where Lewan has said a variation of, "I know I'm getting cut this offseason, I'm just preparing for it now." I mocked Tennessee Peter Skoronski, a left tackle from Northwestern, to prepare for the Lewan release. It's going to be a new era for the Titans soon, and releasing both Tannehill and Lewan, along with trading away A.J. Brown last offseason, show this. They are transitioning, and I am eager to see the changes they make in the next few months. And that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, as it would mean the world and help a ton. Until next time, be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.